August 12, 2000, the Barents Sea, 11:28 in the morning. The first explosion is the equivalent of 100 kilograms of TNT. It registers on seismographs as far away as Alaska. 2 seconds later, the second explosion, 15 times larger, a torpedo warhead detonating inside the forward torpedo compartment of the nuclear submarine K-141 Kursk. The Kursk sinks in 4 minutes. For the next several days, the Russian government will tell the world that rescue operations are proceeding and that hope remains. Norway and Britain will offer rescue equipment and expert divers. Russia will decline, then accept too late, then deny the timeline. 118 men went into the Barents Sea aboard the Kursk. In compartment 9, the rearmost section of the submarine, 23 of them survived the initial explosions. They were alive in the dark, in a sealed compartment, breathing air from emergency tanks, leaving notes for their families. The window in which they might have been saved and the specific decisions that closed that window is what this story is actually about. The Kursk was among the most advanced submarines in the Russian Navy, an Oscar II class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, over 150 meters long, designed to track and destroy American carrier battle groups. It was named after the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. Its crew was experienced, its systems were considered formidable, and its captain, Gennady Lyachin, was 45 years old and highly regarded. In August 2000, the Kursk was participating in a major naval exercise in the Barents Sea, the largest Russian naval exercise since the fall of the Soviet Union. The Russian Navy under Vladimir Putin was attempting to reassert itself as a world-class force, and the exercise was being watched closely by military and political leadership. The Barents Sea exercise that August was, by the standards of the Russian Navy in 2000, a significant demonstration of capability. Russia's military had been through an extraordinarily difficult decade since the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. Funding had dried up, equipment had been poorly maintained, and the institutional knowledge of decades of Cold War operational sophistication had, in many cases, simply retired or emigrated. The August 2000 exercise was part of Putin's early effort to signal that Russia's military was recovering, that the Navy could still conduct complex operations in its home waters. The Kursk's torpedo malfunction occurred during what should have been a straightforward weapons test. The torpedo was fired in an exercise context, not in a combat scenario. The malfunction was the kind of catastrophic failure that the Russian Navy's own testing protocols should theoretically have caught before the weapon entered service. A fuel containment issue in a design that Western navies had specifically decommissioned because of the hydrogen peroxide propulsion system's known volatility. The torpedo that destroyed the Kursk was a Type 6576A, a weapon that used highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide as a fuel oxidizer. The hydrogen peroxide propulsion system was known within Russian naval engineering circles to be problematic. Multiple accidents involving this torpedo type had occurred in earlier decades, and its use had been discontinued in Western navies due to exactly the failure mode that would destroy the Kursk. Hydrogen peroxide can react violently with any organic material, including the seal materials in the torpedo's fuel lines. A leak in the fuel system allows the peroxide to contact material that acts as a catalyst, triggering a rapid exothermic reaction. On August 12th, a faulty weld in torpedo number 657A caused a leak in the fuel section. The hydrogen peroxide reacted with the torpedo's copper alloy components. The first explosion the equivalent of a torpedo warhead's propellant igniting, blew open the bow section of the submarine and triggered the detonation of the remaining warheads stored in the torpedo room approximately 2 seconds later. The second explosion drove a pressure wave through the entire length of the submarine. The forward sections, where most of the crew was stationed during the exercise, were destroyed immediately. 23 men survived in the rearmost compartment. The note Kolesnikov wrote in the darkness of compartment 9 became, after its discovery when the submarine was eventually raised, one of the most powerful documents in the entire history of the disaster. It ran to several pages. It contained the names of all 23 men. It noted that they were alive, that they were awaiting rescue, that they were trying to remain calm. He described their situation methodically. The compartment was sealed, the emergency oxygen supply was limited, the temperature was dropping. The final lines of the note, addressed to his wife, Olga, were written in a different hand, suggesting they were completed at a different time from the earlier passages. They are the words of a man who had run out of time but not out of composure. The note was recovered and given to Kolesnikov's family. It has been made available to researchers and journalists in the years since. It is cited regularly in discussions of the disaster, not as a curiosity, but as evidence of something that the official Russian response to the Kursk disaster systematically avoided acknowledging, that there were people alive inside that submarine for hours, that they were aware of their situation, and that they were waiting for help that was not coming because political decisions were being made by people who were not in the water. Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov was 27 years old. He took out his notepad in the darkness, using whatever light source he had available. He wrote down the names of the 23 men with him. He noted the time. He wrote that they were alive and preparing to survive. He wrote a final note addressed to his wife, Olga. The Russian Navy did not acknowledge publicly that the Kursk had been lost until more than 20 hours after the explosions. Initial communications described a malfunction and suggested the situation was under control. The Navy's own rescue vessels, the Bester and the Prize, attempted to reach the submarine's escape hatch over the following days. Their attempts failed repeatedly. The rescue vessels were old, their equipment degraded, their operators working in difficult sea conditions with equipment that had not been properly maintained since the Soviet era. Norway and Britain contacted Russian authorities within 48 hours of the accident, offering rescue equipment and trained divers. Norway had some of the most advanced offshore saturation diving capabilities in the world, developed over decades of North Sea oil operations. Their equipment was specifically suited to exactly this kind of operation. The offer was made clearly and formally. Russia declined. The stated reasons shifted over the following days. At various points, Russian officials indicated that the offers were unnecessary because Russian rescue operations were proceeding successfully, that the situation didn't require outside help, and that there were technical and procedural complications. As the days passed and it became clear the Russian rescue attempts had failed, the stated positions became increasingly inconsistent. The families of the crew, gathered at a naval base near Murmansk, were kept in an information environment that was simultaneously chaotic and tightly controlled. Official statements contradicted each other. Rumors spread. When one mother of a crew member became publicly distressed at a briefing and needed to be assisted by medical staff, footage circulated suggesting she had been sedated against her will, a claim that remains disputed, but which became internationally symbolic of how the crisis was being managed. Vladimir Putin was on vacation at a resort on the Black Sea during the first critical days of the crisis. He did not return to Moscow immediately. He declined a direct offer from President Clinton to provide American assistance. He gave his first public television interview about the disaster to CNN's Larry King on August 22nd, 10 days after the explosion. When King asked what had happened to the Kursk, Putin paused. Then he said, "It sank." On August 19th, 7 days after the explosion, Russia finally accepted Norway's offer of assistance. Norwegian divers arrived at the site and, within hours of reaching the Kursk, opened the hatch of compartment 9 using equipment and techniques unavailable to the Russian rescue vessels. The compartment was flooded. All 23 men were dead. Later analysis of the compartment found evidence that the survivors had lived for several hours, possibly as long as 8 hours, after the initial explosions. Kolesnikov's note had been written in that time. The cause of their eventual deaths was the ignition of emergency oxygen-generating cartridges that came into contact with seawater that had entered the compartment, causing a flash fire that consumed the remaining oxygen and killed the men who had survived everything else. The question of whether Norwegian divers, given access on day 2 or 3 rather than day 7, could have reached the men while they were still alive was examined carefully in the subsequent investigations. Norwegian officials, while careful in their public statements, indicated that the timeline made the probability of saving survivors significantly higher if access had been granted earlier. Russian naval officials disputed this. The dispute has never been formally resolved. Kolesnikov's note to his wife was recovered from the compartment. "My darling Olia," it began, "I am not suffering. I hope you get this. Oliachka, I love you. Don't suffer too much." The Russian government acknowledged that the disaster was caused by the torpedo's faulty propulsion system. Compensation was paid to families. The Kursk was later raised from the seafloor in a major salvage operation. The specific failures of the rescue operation and the days during which accepted help was declined were not made the subject of any criminal or formal official investigation that resulted in accountability for any individual. The specific note that Kolesnikov wrote and its content became a persistent counterpoint to every official Russian statement about the disaster. Putin had said in his CNN interview that the situation had been handled correctly, that the rescue efforts were as rapid as possible, that the delay in accepting foreign help had not cost lives because there was nobody alive to save by the time help arrived. The note, which showed a man writing calmly about being alive and waiting for rescue, days after the explosion that the official timeline claimed would have killed everyone immediately, said otherwise. Not in a politicized or accusatory way, just by existing as a document from a specific time written by a specific person who was alive when he wrote it. The political response to the Kursk disaster had consequences that extended far beyond the specific question of the submarine's crew. Putin's handling of the crisis, his vacation, the delay in returning to Moscow, the refusal of foreign assistance, the contradictory official statements, the apparent indifference to the suffering of the families, was the first major test of his leadership in the role he had assumed just 6 months earlier, and it was, by most assessments outside Russia, a failure. Within Russia, the coverage of his response was constrained by media relationships that were already shifting toward the kind of state control that would characterize the following decades. A notable confrontation occurred when Putin granted an interview to the state television host Sergei Dorenko, one of Russia's most prominent television journalists at the time, in which questions about the family's accusations that the military and government had lied were raised. The interview was later seen as one of the last moments in which Russian state television treated criticism of Putin with genuine editorial independence. The Kursk was raised from the seafloor in 2001 in an operation conducted with Norwegian assistance. The recovery of the submarine allowed investigators to fully document the torpedo failure and to examine compartment 9 and its contents. The crew's remains were recovered. The families of the dead received them. Kolesnikov's note to his wife was returned to Olga Kolesnikova. She has given interviews about it over the years. She has said that reading it gave her a specific, devastating kind of closure. The knowledge that her husband had thought of her in those final hours, that he had wanted her to know that he was not suffering, that he had loved her to the end. She has also said that she has never stopped being angry about the days of delay. If you want to understand the disasters where the decision that ended any hope of survival was not the explosion, but the refusal that came after it, subscribe. Every week, a story that was hidden in plain sight.